if we're going to induce her, we have to feel confident that she's in a fit state to go through labour. I really hate seeing ewes that are down on the ground, they can't stand, the brain's malfunctioning, they've clearly got an element of metabolic disease like a starvation syndrome because they've been down for so long, and then someone comes along and wants to induce her, is just beyond me. You have to be strong to go through labour. If she's already weak, it's not going to end well, and she's just going to end up a horrible welfare concern that gets euthanized anyway. Now, this part's important. If we're inducing, this is probably the most important thing to know about induction. It is not going to work if she's more than 2 weeks out. It just won't work. It's not enough. What we can give her is not enough to simulate the baby. So it's not going to have any effect if she's more than 14 days out from those babies being ready, fully cooked. The tricky part is knowing whether or not she's 14 days out. And so the things we look at are, does she have colostrum sitting ready in her teats? So she will spring up, her udder will spring. We'll call them the springer mob in cattle. And that's where her full udder, which will already have some colostrum in there, it suddenly swells, and her little teats, instead of being little hanging empty things, become like a triangle shape. Right, so they're firm, they're squishy, they're filled with colostrum. You can even squeeze a bit out onto your hand. I don't recommend opening the teat canals or she might get mastitis, but it's pretty obvious to you if they're filled with colostrum. That usually tells you she's kind of 10 days usually or closer. So if that's the case, awesome. She will also go very loose in the back end, so her vulva will become swollen and she'll go quite loose. So her vagina will get a lot more give in it, and you could get maybe a whole hand up there. That might mean she's quite close. But in terms of getting really loose around the back end, that can be really variable. So the colostrum's a better thing to look at there. It's a bit more reliable. The good thing about it not working if she's more than 2 weeks early is that the lambs also won't be viable. So we don't want her, ideally, we don't want to induce her dropping her lambs, and the lambs are just these little poor things that suffocate on the pasture because they weren't ready. We don't want that happening. Luckily, that's very, very unlikely to happen, because if they're not viable, she's just not going to give birth to them. And saying that, there are some things that we can do to help those lambs cook a little bit faster. So there is a short-term induction, which, to be fair, is almost always what your vet will do, unless you have a very dedicated sheep vet. There's the short-term induction. That's a single dose of a high-acting steroid, okay? And often your vet will say, here's another one. If it hasn't worked in, say, 48 or 72 hours, give her another dose. That's just hoping that we're a little bit closer to her due date and that maybe the second dose will work. What you can do, and maybe suggest it to your vet if they are willing to go and do the research behind it, is you can do a longer term induction where it's a very low dose of the same drug, but it's a low dose for a few days. So I think it's about 5 or 6 days before you give your big whacking dose. And those low doses just help the babies get a little bit more ready, so that when she is induced, and it does work with that big whacking dose, the babies come out and they're ready to bounce around and drink milk and they're good to go. Otherwise, unfortunately, if you're right on the cusp and you induce and she's 2 weeks early, she might give birth to them and you might end up with some little orphan lambs. Not the worst thing in the world, but maybe you don't want to do that. Little ones that might need some extra TLC to pull through.